Village, and welcome to Sex Is, the podcast brought to you by DC's Health. Sex Is. My name is Poet. I am from WPGC 95.5, proud resident of Congress Heights in Ward 8. My pronouns, of course, she, her, and hers. Now, this is episode 2 of our Sex Is podcast. If you missed episode 1, when we were talking sex and communication, no worries. You can log on to sexisdc.org/the podcast and get into all that goodness. But today, it is all about sex and consent. I cannot wait to introduce you to the panel that we have today. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about the Sex Is DC campaign. It was a campaign created by DC Health to encourage open, honest, and judgment-free, can I say that one more again? Judgment-free conversations about sex and sexual health between youth, young adults, and their trusted adults. So this campaign was created to share accurate information and resources, which we plan to share with you today, and above all else, just a safe space to have a conversation about sex and sexual health, because when we know better, we do better, we move better. So with that said, can I please introduce you to a bomb.com panel that is going to bless you today? Welcome. Thank y'all for taking the time for the Village. And I will start with Brianna. Please introduce yourself and then pass the mic to another panel member.
Hi, my name's Brianna. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm from Ward 1 DC, and I'm a member of the Youth Advisory Board for the Sex Is campaign. I'm going to pass it on to Michaela.
Hi guys, my name is Michaela. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am currently located at Kutztown, Pennsylvania, but I'm originally from Ward 7 in Washington, D.C. I'm affiliated with the Young Women's Project, and I am a youth advocate. I'm going to pass it to JP.
Hi, my name is JP. I'm a youth advocate with the Young Women's Project. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm from Ward 4 DC, and I'm going to pass it to Kennedy.
Hey guys, I'm Kennedy. My pronouns are she and her. I'm currently in Lexington, Kentucky, but I'm from Ward 7 DC, and I'm with Sex Is DC. I'm going to pass it to Dania.
Hi, my name is Dania Alcozer. I'm part of the Youth Advisory Board. I live in Ward 2, and my pronouns are her, she. I will pass it to Chloe.
I'm Chloe. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a part of the Youth Advisory Board with Sex Is, and I'm from Ward 7, and I currently reside in Ward 3.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I know you have things to do and so many places that you could be, but you're here with me, and I am going to take full advantage of it. Before we get started, how is life going for you these days? How are we feeling? How's the moment?
Life's pretty good. These hybrid classes they okay. See, like, I'm a journalist major, and I want to go into the sports world, but it's kind of hard to get my feet wet because no sports going on right now on campus, and it's just no sports in general for real. So I really can't do anything, but it's so far so good. Next semester we can just get our feet wet.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. I'm most definitely looking forward to next semester. I feel like that's kind of like what everybody that's in the class of 2020 is kind of like tunnel vision looking forward to, because right now these online classes is not where it's at, because we're like struggling in front of a screen all day and limited social interactions, but soon that's going to be over, so I'm ready for then.
How are you dealing with the limited social interaction? If you were class of 2020, your high school was kind of cut short, and then you're walking into college and you're kind of like, wait, this ain't the story my parents and them told me. So how are you learning to navigate that space?
I actually started jogging, and that helped a lot, like just getting out, like forcing myself to go somewhere.
JP, you look like you had something that you needed to let people know. What can we get into? What you got?
Yeah, sitting in front of the computer all day, almost every day, is not fun for anyone, I don't believe. I mean, the students in my online classes seem miserable every single morning when we have to log on at 9:30. So being able to sit down and relax and have that kind of time to sit down and settle your mental space is really important.
Has anybody picked up any new quarantine routines? Well, you picked up jogging, Chloe. Anybody making bread, doing projects at home, started a whole business, fell in a little bit of love?
Actually, I've been driving a lot more this quarantine trying to get my provisional license by November, so crossing my fingers. But also, I've been struggling with like online school as well. I'm a senior this year in high school, so it kind of sucks having my senior year like online. Like it's cool with the free periods and all, but like it's also kind of sucks because I can't get the like first like senior year experience with like homecoming, and like our school has this like big pep rally for the seniors and we like run on the field. I don't get that, so I'm just hoping like by the end I get like at least a graduation or something.
I'm crossing my fingers, my toes, my arms, and everything else that we are not here by this time next year and that it only gets better as this year wraps. How about that? We'll put that up into the universe. I want to thank you again for joining me. Before we get started, not a lot of rules, except for maybe a few. This is a very safe space, so how you feel is how you feel. How it comes out is how it comes out. There is no judgments here because we all have different experiences, and the reason why we're here today is to share those experiences in hopes of someone learning a way, 2, 3, or 4 to handle situations that may happen to them in their life. Also, we don't yuck anyone's yum because what you may not like, someone may love, and you might be missing out on something. You just never know. So with that, let's talk about defining consent. What does consent mean to you? Or when you hear the word consent, what do you think?
So consent means to me basically just verbal confirmation that you have permission to do something, and whether that mean like physical or whether that mean like, just to talk about something, concerning like patient confidentiality, you have to have consent for that. And it's like, as long as the person that you're asking can give you a clear answer, then you have permission to do what you said that you were going to do and nothing else.
I completely agree with Michaela, and I just wanted to add one other thing to that. I think consent is verbal, like affirmation, and it's physical as well. Like during the whatever act you're planning on doing, just like seeing their body language and like picking up on that, checking in every now and then. I feel like that's a part of consent.
Did anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I also want to add that like with the body language, like, and especially like the tone of voice, if like you ask them and they're like, yeah, sure, like you could see that there's a bit of doubt, but they're like, yeah, I'm like totally cool with that. Like you can see that there's enthusiasm and they're actually okay with that. Also, I want to emphasize that like consent's ongoing, so maybe one day they can like say yes to like an intimate act one day and then like, yeah, I'm totally fine with that, but like when it's actually happening they might like change their heart or like their mind, and like you have to respect that.
So with that said, is there a way to ask for consent or a proper way to ask for consent? Is there a time that I should best talk consent?
I think when you're asking for consent, it should be straightforward. I don't need to read between the lines. You tell me what you want, how you want it, and just everything clear so that my answer won't be misinterpreted, or I won't misinterpret what you saying. Now I said yeah, but I really meant no. You know what I mean? So I just think it needs to be clear, cut. That's it.
And I think consent should be asked for before an act. So you can't ask for consent while in the act or like after you do something. It should be asked before, and I think it should be made like loud and clear. Like, don't put around the bush and like try to like add stuff. So like just be like clear about the question.
What about people who say, well, I got consent because they didn't say no. They didn't necessarily say yes either, but they didn't say, I didn't hear a no.
I feel like that is not a valid answer. Honestly, if they didn't say yes, then you shouldn't do anything at all. It's not an interpretation of anything. No, it's a straightforward answer. Like if I say yes, then obviously I want to do this. But at the same time, I can also change my mind later and say no. But if something is happening and you're touching the person, you're doing whatever, and they don't give a clear answer, you should still ask them if they still want to continue doing this, or if it's okay if you can touch them, or if it's okay that you can do certain actions with them.
I think this scenario that you just mentioned, Poet, is something that happens a lot of times at parties when like the victim of sexual assault or whatever the case may be, where they didn't give their consent, like they'll end up like if they're like under the influence of like whatever substance, then they can't always give the verbal consent, which is why I also like mentioned physical consent earlier, because if you can see that the person is like incapable of communicating, yes, I want to do this, then clearly that's not what you should be doing. And, you know, reevaluate the situation.
Thank you. What about if I say yes to you giving me a kiss? Does that automatically mean I've consented maybe to sex or maybe a little fondling? Or should there be consent every step as we engage in something new?
There should be consent for every step. So if someone gives you consent to give a kiss, that's just for the kiss, not anything else. If you want to do something else, and you should ask the question for the other action.
I agree with that. And some people may think like it's a little weird to like stop in the middle of kissing before you're about to touch them. Like, oh, can I do this? But like there are ways to make that a part of the flow, a part of the vibe that you're trying to have with the person. And even outside of that, nonverbal cues that you can send to like let them know. And if the person's not okay with it, then they'll show you in some way, shape, or form that they're not okay with it.
I agree a lot. And also I think for people that think it's kind of awkward to like stop for asking for consent, it's better to be awkward than to do something that someone doesn't want.
I agree. How do you know when you have your partner's consent? I remember sending out a tweet and posting on my stories that we were going to have this conversation. And someone said, well, if they're already my girlfriend and my boyfriend and we've already had sex before, then isn't that really all the consent that I need?
Whenever someone brings up something like this, I like to address the fact that consent has to be maintained throughout time. It's not there forever. It has to keep being restated for every time that you decide to do something with that person. It's not one and done. It's over and over and over again. And what consenting looks like is being enthusiastic about it, not being very indecisive, being engaged in whatever you're doing, being there with you, doing it with you, not you doing it to them.
I feel like often there's like clear signs that somebody isn't like into whatever like the act may be that aren't verbal. Like if they, you know, seem sad all of a sudden, or if like the mood just switches real quick, or if they start crying out of nowhere, like things like that happen in those situations. And I feel like a lot of times it's not addressed in a lot of health classes. And when it comes to just not knowing how to deal with the situation where you're the person that wants to do something with somebody else, and then let's say they're the one that starts crying or they're the one that starts acting different out of nowhere, and you're not sure why, instead of pressuring them to continue, asking them, are they okay? Is there anything you need to do? Did you do something wrong? Those simple questions can make a huge difference when it comes to consent and like how people view sexual intercourse and things along those lines.
Can we talk condom consent? That was something else that came up in my stories. Is there a consent that I should get, whether it is to use or not to use a condom or a certain kind? And if so, what does that conversation, how could I have that conversation with my partner if I'm not sure how to engage?
Well, I think when concerning condoms and consent, honestly, that really is a discussion that you should have with, if it's a situation with your partner, that's a discussion you should have beforehand. And you should give consent, basically just asking them questions, because I feel like people don't realize that there are many different types of condoms out there, and there are different ways that you can work around situations. For example, if males don't feel like wearing a condom, there is such thing as female condoms. If people are allergic to latex, then they have non-latex condoms. Like, there are solutions to everything. So when you're talking about a partner, I feel like there are more situations where you can just talk beforehand. However, if it's a situation where it's like it just happened in the moment, like you weren't really planning to do something, but it happened anyway, I feel like still asking them if they're okay with having physical contact with or without a condom is a really big step in the right direction.
Did anyone else want to chime in?
I think also just having your own, like, because there, like Michaela said, there are like many different types of condoms and everybody has their preference, so it can be a fun thing to go exploring, you know, in whatever section of CVS and get your own, like whatever type you like, and that can be empowering because you know that like it's not going to be damaged, it's not going to be expired because you got it yourself. And so that's a way to introduce it, like maybe going with your partner or whoever you're choosing to do something with, going with them to the store and getting it. That could be helpful too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. Also, adding on to the consent with condoms, even like I think it's just a communication thing because even if like a girl's on birth control or something, people may think, oh, okay, I don't need to wear a condom because she can't get pregnant. But you're still wearing a condom, you're still protecting her and yourself from STIs and all that type stuff. So I just think that you just need to communicate with that stuff. Like you need to communicate with everything else.
We got the right panel today. And since we're talking condoms, a reminder that if you're a DC resident, you can get free condoms and lube actually sent to your home, all discreet and everything. You can go to sexisdc.org/free condoms for that information. Now, with that said, let's switch gears a little bit, panel. Can we talk about sexual harassment and what that means to you?
I think sexual harassment means like any unwanted attention that comes from somebody like in a sexual manner.
Sexual harassment is just a sexualized version of harassment. It's repeated actions of unwanted sexual attention.
Do you believe it's possible to be sexually harassed on social media?
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely be sexually harassed on social media. And it's not just about like if someone comments something on your photo or, you know, they DM you a couple times or they can't take no for an answer. It's such things as like sending them unwanted things, sending them unwanted pictures. They ask you to please stop. It's like continuously like harassing them and just asking them like, well, it's like just asking unwanted questions and basically like Chloe and JP said, just giving them unwanted sexual attention.
Another very common form of sexual harassment that me and my friends have experienced numerous times and times again has been like through Instagram DMs. I've been getting like sugar daddy requests in my DMs, and like that's unwanted. That's like annoying, and it doesn't make me feel good. You know, having just turned 18 with grown men like DMing me like all these things about like what they can do for money, what I should do for money and whatever. And I just feel like stuff like that, I feel like Instagram needs to take that more serious. I feel like that should be talked about in more health classes. And yeah.
So I think catcalling is a big thing right now too. Like just going out in the street wearing anything, people are like calling you out for it, and like you don't even feel comfortable just walking in your neighborhood because like grown men or like just like old people are like calling you stuff, and I think that's a big thing right now too.
I totally agree, Dania. Even now, like everybody's wearing masks and people are still catcalling. How could you possibly see my face or anything with a mask on? And also, it was this video on Twitter where this lady put a camera and she walked through New York and men constantly catcalling her. One man was walking beside her for 5 minutes. It was just so like dangerous and just putting other people in the perspective of a woman just walking down the street minding her business. She literally didn't say a word to anybody, and many men was catcalling her. So it's something that's very dangerous that people just take as something casual that we should talk about a little more when it comes to sexual harassment.
I think something to mention, because I really agree with what you just said, and I feel like something to mention to add on to that is just the fact that a lot of people sometimes blame the victim of sexual harassment because the way they were dressed, or like, I don't know, their personality, if they have a bold personality, or if they were simply being nice to somebody and it's mistaken as like a flirtation or as flirting. And so I feel like just things like that is something we all need to consider and we need to look at within ourselves. Like, are we stereotyping young women because of the way they're dressed? And is that why people are catcalling them? Or is that why people are getting away with things like that? And I feel like that's just something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. Like, we have to realize that catcalling is like the actual problem and not what the woman is wearing. Because I've been like catcalled, like literally no makeup, wearing like a hoodie, like jeans, like nothing like is showing, and I still get catcalled and stopped. And it's like very uncomfortable, and sometimes I feel very unsafe, especially if I'm by myself. So oftentimes, like I do like FaceTime my friends. I'm like, hey, like this guy's like giving me a weird like impression, or he's making me feel weird, and they already automatically know, like, okay, I'm gonna stay on the phone with you and let me know when you're safe. And I just think that just shows you something, that it's literally catcalling is the actual problem.
Do you believe that that's something that should be taught in school, like an actual sexual harassment and even a sex and consent or a consent conversation? Do you believe that these are things that should be implemented in what children are taught as they advance through school?
I
Yeah.
think it should. Well, go ahead, JP.
All right, thank you. I think that catcalling and sexual harassment and things like that happen a lot more to minors than people really realize. And we don't talk about it enough in our schools and the effects that it could possibly have on a person's mental state. And that really shows something about our school system and our health curriculum and how minimal it can really be.
I think health classes should include like lessons on how to approach the other gender when you want to have some sort of, relationship or anything with them in that way, because I feel like a lot of people just don't know how to do it, and that's why they resort to catcalling or peer pressuring or whatever the case may be, because that's just what they've seen.
I totally agree with JP and Chloe, but I also think that it starts at home too, because a lot of the time you see on TV dads telling their sons, "Hey, do this, do that," but don't tell the girl nothing. And even it was this guy who's famous on TikTok for telling his son, his little 4-year-old son, how to get girls while his mom isn't watching. And I just think it starts at home, and it's not what you wear, like Brianna said. It's simply just the man or the female who is sexually harassing this person. So I really think it starts at home with little conversations, little actions, just showing your child how it's supposed to be done instead of influencing them the wrong way. And then they grow up and stretch it.
I think that's 100% true, but I also think for the people that don't have relationships with whoever they live with at home, schools need to take this more seriously, specifically because of that.
I
Yeah.
know that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. When it comes to like sexual assault or like sexual harassment, I feel like schools should take that more seriously, because oftentimes they kind of just ignore it and just like let it slide and like kind of ignore like the girl's story. And I think we should definitely take that more seriously and start normalizing how to like respect people and not make them uncomfortable.
I think that when it comes to like sexual harassment in schools, that oftentimes they blame the victim about it, because realistically speaking, most victims of sexual harassment are females, and they like to blame the females about it, like what were you wearing, like school dress coding, and oftentimes where it's been times where females are being pulled aside for what they're wearing, and they're distracting them from their education for the sake of the male education, not taking into consideration the fact that you're distracting her from class time. What she's wearing is not distracting anybody. And it's really nonsensical to continuously take females out of their class simply for wearing like a crop top or simply for wearing like a tank top. And the reason why I brought this up is because a lot of institutionalized organizations believe that those are the reasons for like catcalling and sexual harassment, when it's not. It really goes back to what Chloe and Kennedy were saying. It starts at really like at home and how they feel as though they should approach someone, because some people don't know how to approach someone, so they automatically resort to what they've been taught or what they've seen.
I also wanted to state how not just women go through a lot of like sexual harassment, but also men. Like I was reading an article a couple of days how a lot of men stated feeling like sexually harassed, like during like sports. How like I know there's like a lot of like butt slapping, and they take that as a joke, but some people don't like that, and so people reported that as sexual harassment. And I know that happens a lot during sports too. Like I've seen it, and I you can say how like the person didn't give consent for like the butt slapping or anything like that.
When we talk consent, a lot of times it seems to be given a gender role or a stereotype. Do you feel that maybe that's the reason why a lot of other people don't report it, because it's not normally associated with them or the way that they live? And is that something else that we might need to take a look at?
Well, I was just getting ready to say that when it comes to like consent and like sexual harassment with like gender roles and stuff, what a lot of people don't understand is that yes, males can be sexually harassed, and oftentimes it doesn't even come from females, it comes from other males. So it's like you just got to take into consideration that everyone is impacted by the decisions that the few make that make just everyone like uncomfortable.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that. Males, especially in high school, tend to be sexually harassed a lot more by their male counterparts and their male peers rather than the female, simply because they think it's funny. They are genuinely attracted. I'm not sure. I'm not going to judge anyone for that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're putting it out that way and making someone else feel uncomfortable, that's something that you shouldn't be doing in any situation, right? And a lot of the time when that happens to a male, they feel as if it's not okay to say something about it to a trusted adult simply because they are a male. That's not something that we're really taught is okay to report. It's like, oh, you were sexually harassed? Come on, bro. Stop acting childish. It's not that serious. When in reality, it is that serious, and it can make someone feel that uncomfortable.
Is it possible that we could look at sexual harassment as a form of bullying?
I think it is.
I think it is a part of bullying. For example, I'm not really familiar with the show, but I'm pretty sure this happened in 13. What's the show called? 13
Reasons Why. 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah, 13 Reasons Why. The guys was talking about her butt, and that influenced her to suicide. One of the things that influenced her to suicide, if I recall correctly. So that form of bullying led her to suicide, and it's also Suicide Awareness Month in September, just to put that out there. And that's a form of bullying that she didn't like. So she took that, and she also took her life. So yeah, I do think it has a lot to do with bullying too.
Because it definitely deals with how you walk away feeling, the lingering effects of it. For those who are comfortable sharing, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt like, and I'll pose two questions, either someone didn't properly get your consent, or you felt like you were being harassed and you weren't really sure what to do?
I actually have an example of when that happened to me, because I mentioned how I used to live in Ward 7 of DC, and like for those who don't know that end up watching this, that's a very different part of DC compared to the rest of it. Ward 7 and 8 is like east of the river. Everybody from DC knows that like gentrification hasn't necessarily reached that part of the city yet, so it looks completely different than the rest of it. And just, I don't know, that neighborhood, like I'm from like Deanwood, and so just walking around that neighborhood, just, I don't know, going to the corner store or going to CVS, like it's been so many times where people have like stopped their car and reversed it, or followed me down an alley, or walked me up an escalator, like so many times. And it's like, you can report it to the station manager at Metro, they don't care. You can, like, I'll tell my parents, but like they don't see the person. So it's like they can't do anything once it already happened, but call the police or, so have you. But the police can't do anything unless you have like a real description. And if you're like really nervous in the situation, if you're not paying attention, you can't remember those things. So that's something that's happened to me that I'm sure is very common.
There was a recent situation where sexual harassment has happened, and honestly, it made me very uncomfortable, because as someone who works with Young Women's Project, and we've talked about this, and as a youth advocate, we talked about like steps that we can do. But like Chloe said, in a situation when it happens, sometimes you get nervous, sometimes you clam up, sometimes you forget like the procedures and steps you need to take, sometimes you forget like that you can have a safe space by just going to someone else. So it's really difficult to like navigate between your emotions and your thoughts in that moment. And I feel as though the reason why it should be taught, like sexual harassment should be talked about more, is so that that doesn't really happen to everyone else, so they don't freeze up, so they don't forget, so that they know what to do, so they know who to talk to. So it's just, I feel like it's a really important topic that needs to be covered.
Jumping off of what Chloe was saying, even like catcalling and sexual harassment and stuff even happen not even in the bad neighborhoods. Like I said, I'm in Lexington, which is completely different from DC culturally, racially, if that's the word, everything. Like, I'm just, so me and my friend was coming from church in our sweatpants, and guys are with the microphones out the cars, lapping around the block, honking at us, slowing down while we walking past. We literally going back to the clothes. We're having sweatpants on, so we're not like, hey, look at me. So we're just like, it happens everywhere, no matter where you at, no matter what state, what city, who, white, black, Asian. It just happens to females everywhere. And it's definitely something that needs to be talked about more instead of being normalized.
That actually reminds me of this Twitter thread I seen recently when it was talking about how like a lot of girls were just mentioning how like they just don't go for jogs at night, or they just don't go out at night, or after 5 once daylight savings comes, because literally like that's dangerous unless you're with a buddy or whoever. Like that's not smart. And I feel like it shouldn't have to be like that. We shouldn't have to limit our going out, our enjoying our lives or whatever, just because people like don't know consent. They don't understand the word no.
Do any of you feel like whenever the conversation of alcohol or drugs is introduced and someone's also talking lack of consent or sexual assault or harassment, that plays a role into how people respond or how they deal?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times when you're under influence, like there usually isn't a response or a limited one or a slurred one. So, that's not consent. And I feel like a lot of people, that are at parties or in those situations, like in the moment, they're like, I feel like it'll kind of go over their head that like it's not consent, even if she is saying yes and she's drunk, or he is saying yes and he's clearly out of it. You can tell like, that they don't really mean it, or like they can't really mean it if they're that much out of it. And I feel like, understanding that, and that's why I feel like having friends with you at parties and stuff is smart. Having a buddy system when you're in an unfamiliar place, like especially when you're going to college and stuff, like a lot of us are, like just being around other people and knowing our limit is the smartest thing to do when it comes to consent in parties.
On the way people respond, when it comes to alcohol and drugs, I feel like when the female says her claim, she's taken as, oh, she was under the influence, she don't remember nothing, instead of he took advantage of her when she was under that influence. So, and I feel like this was recently in the news with the lady, with the guy who was in the court system, but don't quote me on that. But it's taken as like double standards, and it's just like, why can't he have taken advantage of her just because he's in power now back then? So yeah.
Yeah, I agree, because I feel like a lot of times when it comes to sexual assault claims, like they always automatically like just kind of disregard the victim's story, and they just do not want to hold that person accountable. So you know how like it's proven till guilty, like they kind of do that with like the victim, although like there's actual like allegations against them.
JP, I saw you nodding.
What I was going to say was, when it comes down to the topic of alcohol and being under the influence, it's really hard for a lot of people to understand, simply because it's extremely narrow path to walk, right? There's a lot of kind of legal stances that go behind whether or not something counts as sexual assault when it's under the influence, because there's so many different variables that play into it. But the baseline is that people should understand, when someone is under the influence, they are not really thinking for themselves. They are being, their mind and their mindsets being kind of manipulated by an external force that they can't, well, they could control, but now they're under the influence, they can't really control anymore. So any position you're in when someone else is under the influence, that's taking advantage of them, and then when they're in their weak spot.
I think that was well said. And I also wanted to add that when it comes to being under the influence, even if like both people are under the influence, it's still not consent. And I feel like a lot of people like may not think that. Like after like first thought, like, oh, if I'm high and she's high, then it cancels out. Like it's not that type of situation. And so I feel like when it comes to like these serious topics, like asking questions to your trusted adult or going to whatever physician you may have and asking them questions like along those lines, especially when it comes to consent, when it comes to being under the influence, because that's like the laws involved in that. And so I feel like that's just something to keep in mind.
I've heard a few of you mention your trusted adult. As you're navigating this thing called life, sex, and communication, in this case, sex and consent, how impactful has it been to have a trusted adult that may have experienced a few things, has an understanding of some things that you're just now learning about? How important is that person to have as a member of your tribe?
It has been like really, really helpful. It's been really important to have someone in that situation that is someone, especially an adult, because if they understand what you're going through, they know the next steps to take, and they may be able to be taken, as sad as it is, they are taken more seriously about it than you and your peers would be. So just having someone who is an adult and just understands what you're going through and just understands like the next steps to take is really important.
I think having a trusted adult just gives you like a lot of comfort and you feel like protected and you feel like someone really has your back and you just feel more motivated to like try to like resolve the problem that you're going through.
Thank you. I appreciate you again for even giving me your time today. Before we wrap this episode, what parting words of advice would you like to give the person watching when it comes to sex and consent and the power of their voice in this matter?
Consent is reversible, so you can say yes at a time and you can say no later. And yeah.
My advice would be that if your like answer is no for whatever the person's trying to do and they take that as convince me, they're not the one. And like you also just shouldn't mess with them because clearly they don't care about what you think.
My advice is that even if we're youth, we shouldn't be silenced, and that our voice still holds impact and it holds a lot of weight. It's 2020 and the youth are taking over, so use your voice wisely and just use it in general.
If you are going to participate in any like intimate acts, just make sure you're 110% okay with what you're doing, you're comfortable with your partners, and make sure like it's something that you won't regret after on, and that both parties are okay with the act.
It's important to realize that you do have control over your own body and you have control whether people can do something for or with you. So just remember that you have the control, and it's okay. Consent is good. Consent is okay. Don't ever be like awkward or shy about giving or asking about consent, because it's better to be awkward than to not get consent at all.
I would have to say just a general rule of thumb is to treat people how they want to be treated and take that into consideration how you could possibly affect them with what you say. And in terms of consent, like my Kayla said, don't be shy to ask. It's not anything that'll ruin the mood. It's never that serious. Just make sure you get it out.
Y'all have been amazing. Michaela, JP, Chloe, Kennedy, Brianna, Dania. I can't thank y'all enough for spending your time and making episode 2 of Sex is the Podcast, Sex and Consent, as dope as it was. For those watching, you can go to sexisdc.org. Listen, see episode 1. You can get information on all the available resources to you, like did you know about Get Checked DC, where it's DC's home-based testing program that provides residents with free HIV testing? If you're a DC resident, you can go to sexisdc.org/free condoms and get condoms and lube sent right to your doorstep in very discreet packaging. And for all the things that we discussed today, all the situations that we went over, if you find that you are in a situation, I want you to know that there is a DC Rape Crisis Center that is also available for you, and they can be reached at 202-333-RAPE. A reminder that DC Health Sexist campaign is for this, because when we know better, we do better, we move better. There's no dumb questions. There's no yuck to someone's yum. And look at all the things that we learned today because of this conversation. Until the next episode, this is us saying peace. It's okay to communicate. Consent is not a bad thing. And well, everything else you need, sexisdc.org. We'll see you on the next episode. I know you're ready for it already, but you got to wait.